On this edition of Natural Farming Systems in the South, we're immersing ourselves in flowers. We'll visit Mark Kane and Michael Crane, two farmers who know all about the pleasure and the profit of producing and marketing cut flowers. Nestled in the Ozark Mountains near Huntsville, Arkansas, you'll find an oasis of color. This is Dripping Springs Garden, owned and operated by Mark Kane and Michael Crane since 1984. It's a 40-acre farm with 5 acres in production. Half of those acres are devoted to growing cut flowers.
When you have a small area like we have for cropping, you have to be careful to plant very productive crops that have high value, and also to concentrate your growing in intensive production.
And intensive it is. To maximize growing area, crops are grown in wide beds instead of rows. Many beds get more than one crop planted in them each season. Crops are planted in successions to guarantee continual harvests. Row covers, greenhouses, and hoop houses are used to extend the season. But Michael and Mark balance their aggressive production techniques with a consideration for their own quality of life.
The teacher that I studied under believed that we have the capacity as horticulturalists to create unique living environments for ourselves as well as our plants. So he certainly believed in the creation of a magical garden environment. And so we've tried to recreate that somewhat here.
Yeah, I mean, you're surrounded by beauty, you know, you get up, you walk outside, and your office is there, you know, the birds that you hear right now, the breeze, the clouds, the colors of the seasons. I have a great, window.
Mark and Michael specialize in cut flowers because they found over the years that they have a good market for them and can get a high return on flowers. But they are careful to manage their risk by planting a diversity of other crops. More than 30 other crops are grown at Dripping Springs Garden. Everything from grapes to garlic, blueberries, shiitake mushrooms, and even bamboo.
Of diversifying, you don't have all your eggs in one basket. For instance, we have 2 acres of blueberries here. We have 2.5 acres of cut flower crops, and we lost 80% of the blueberries this year because of weather. So if the whole area had been in blueberries, we'd be looking for jobs, probably.
Mark and Michael market their crops at the popular Fayetteville Farmers Market, about an hour from their farm. They sell at the market 34 weeks out of the year. Having a wide selection of crops at their booth helps increase sales.
Someone who's coming to us to buy a bouquet is also going to look at the shiitake mushrooms, they're going to look at the salad mix, they're going to buy some potatoes or some onions. And flowers are a wonderful way to attract people to your market stand.
Cut flowers are grown on only half of the production land at Dripping Springs Garden, but they account for over 3/4 of the gross income.
It's not unusual for a cut flower grower to realize $20,000 to $30,000 per acre gross on cut flowers. We don't sell wholesale to florists, we sell directly to the public, and most of what we sell to the public is in the form of bouquets. When you have a bouquet business like that, you need many, many different items to choose from to make the bouquets. So that can be called a value-added product because you're actually putting it in a bunch and you're also getting the money that the florist would make in the creation of the bouquet.
Careful planning is needed for a constant and plentiful supply of flowers to provide a variety of colors, shapes, textures, and fragrances for these bouquets. Over 60 varieties of cut flowers are produced at Dripping Springs Garden. All crops at Dripping Springs Garden are grown using organic growing techniques. In addition to using organic controls and fertilizers, close attention is paid to building soil health. Cover crops are grown to add organic matter and to support microbial life. Plus, special cultivation equipment and mulch are used to protect the soil. Pest and disease pressures are reduced by crop rotation and crop diversity.
So if we were to have that entire area in cabbages, say, we would have a huge pest problem because you've just set the table with one item and you're going to have population explosions of particular pests that feed on those things.
Many of the cut flowers help with pest control by attracting beneficial insects.
Especially the little parasitic wasp and things that you want to have around. It also attracts all the little bees and things that help to do pollination.
We do some spraying here and there, but it'll be with products like neem oil or Bacillus thuringiensis. Sometimes we'll use some rotenone. We don't have too many serious pest problems on our cut flowers. And to tell the truth, sometimes if we have particularly difficult time with a pest, we'll stay away from that crop.
Many people make the mistake of thinking of cut flower growing as easy work because they equate it with the flower beds in their yard. But to make a successful business of growing and selling cut flowers, vast knowledge and skill are needed. Plus, it requires more manual labor than small-scale vegetable production.
We normally have taken on 2 interns a year that live with us here during the summer from April until usually end of October.
The success of the farm depends on a healthy workforce.
So we take some time every day for yoga practice. And that's a great way to stay fit. I'm 51 now and my back is in great shape. A lot of us are driven by the financial aspect. You know, if we just do a little bit more work, we'll have more product to take to market. But there's a law of diminishing effect there, diminishing return, because if you hurt your back, you're out of business. So the yoga is great, not just for the physical upkeep, but also for the mental health that we need to have in order just to enjoy living in a beautiful place.
It's not just a beautiful place, it's a highly productive farm. Dripping Springs Garden is a leader in cut flower production, and it all begins right here in a 30 by 80 foot propagation greenhouse.
But it'd be very expensive to run this operation if we didn't produce our own plants. So we start in there in mid-January. We'll start producing transplants that will start going out to the field in March, and we produce somewhere around 20,000 transplants a year to go out in the field.
In early spring, it's time to prepare the outdoor beds for the transplants.
Generally, we have a winter cover crop on of hairy vetch and wheat. And we will start turning that down with the spader at the beginning of April. And we'll give it about 3 weeks to decompose. And we'll give it one last spading and tillage. This is a Chelly spader. It's a great implement for chopping cover crops or green manure crops into the soil. The spade goes into the soil and flips the soil to the side without turning it upside down.
If a rototiller were used for primary cultivation, it would pulverize and invert the soil. Thus, the spader, demonstrated here on a dry July day, helps with soil health. After spading the bed, organic fertilizer is applied according to soil test recommendations.
This is granulated chicken litter that I'm putting on here. We only use organic fertilizers. The only other things we might put on beds like this from time to time would be sprinkling of wood ashes, and also we'll use rock powders every 4 years or so. The nice thing about a bed situation is that we can fertilize only the bed surface. We're not fertilizing the pads. We're not broadcasting fertilizer over the entire field. It's simply going right on the place where we need it. I'm just going to broadcast it over the surface here, and then we'll work it in with the tiller.
During this final cultivation, the tiller is run lightly over the top of the bed. After tilling, drip irrigation lines are laid on the bed. A drip irrigation system makes the most efficient use of water and labor. It also helps prevent plant disease and damage to blooms caused by overhead watering. To reduce weed pressure and to help retain soil moisture, most beds are mulched. Beds planted with bulbs are mulched with wheat straw after they are planted. But beds receiving transplants are first covered with landscape fabric. Before the fabric is placed on the bed, holes in which to transplant the crops are burned into the fabric using a handheld propane torch.
I really don't want a big opening in this landscape fabric. The tighter the hole is, the fewer weeds are going to come through, but you don't want it to be so small that it's difficult to transplant through.
This bed prep is time-consuming, but it actually takes 1/4 the time it would to keep these beds weeded without mulch. This landscape fabric will last for at least 5 or 6 years, and with planting holes already burned in it, the labor savings will be even greater over the next few years.
It runs about $70 per 300 feet. That's about 8 times the price of black plastic, but then you're going to landfill the black plastic every year, and we were looking for an option that would last us longer. Well, the other nice thing about landscape fabric is that it lets rain penetrate. Black plastic doesn't. Okay, we are just going to pin this down so that the wind won't catch it. So now we're going to put a thin layer of straw on this to reduce the heat coming off the landscape fabric.
The straw is pushed aside just enough to plant through the holes burned through the landscape fabric.
We always give them a nice watering in once they're transplanted, and that'll hold them for a week or so, generally, with all this cover on it. Then we'll have to check again to make sure that we don't need to water again before the roots of the plant can reach the drip system.
For tall growing flowers, support netting is added at about 3-foot height to ensure they produce the straight stems needed. Care of the growing flowers includes protecting them from deer.
The deer fence is very important because you can do everything well, all of the propagation and the planting and the management, irrigation. But if in 2 nights deer come and take all the tops off of 100 or 200 or 1,000 gladiolas, you've lost everything. It's 2 planes of electric fence. They're separated by a 3-foot wide distance, and supposedly deer do not like to jump over something where they don't have great depth perception of how wide this is.
In addition to the flowers grown outdoors, many varieties are grown under unheated plastic-covered shelters called hoop houses. This adds significantly to Mark and Michael's income because they have blooming flowers to take to market much earlier and can also grow specialty crops that are difficult to grow in the great outdoors, where temperatures and rain are unpredictable.
We put these houses in, it was 3 years ago, and the first year this house was paid for by the Lisianthus, and the lower house we had full of lilies, and those lilies paid for the house. So our first growing season we covered the cost of the house.
Dahlias are ready to be picked.
With more than 60 varieties of cut flowers, 30 varieties of vegetables, and a frequent rotation schedule, it's critical for Michael and Mark to keep meticulous records. They keep 4 sets of records.
The first is a greenhouse journal in which we put down exactly what's been sown in the greenhouse, what seed company it came from, how many flats were sown, sometimes when it germinated. That's one basic record of the greenhouse. The other form of record keeping that we have is a daily log of what takes place in the garden. So we'll record all the garden activities for that day, including the maximum minimum temperatures for the day, whether it rained, how much rainfall we had, sometimes how many people visited. But mainly it's we planted such and such a crop in this area, etc. Another way to track that is that we have a mapping system for the whole garden in which every bed has a letter and a number, and we're able to write down on that map exactly what was planted, the date, and the variety. And often I'll make notations on that same map of when something starts to flower or what the end of some flowering period is. Well, the importance of keeping track of everything that's going on in your garden, besides the rotational aspect of not planting things behind one another from one year to the next for disease prevention, we can't get this information anywhere else. We can't get it from looking in a book somewhere. We can only get it from finding out exactly what happened in our garden during that period. If we know what happened here, we can build on our successes. Having crops coming on all during the growing period requires that the grower pay close attention to succession planting. That's when it's important to use your records from the previous year to know how long it's going to take a particular crop to come on, let's say sunflowers, and how long that flowering period is so that you can have a next crop coming on as soon as the first crop's finishing up. We also keep a market journal that goes with us to market. We have exactly what went to market that day and what was not sold. It's important to be smart with your cropping and not grow crops that can't be sold. So record keeping becomes a critical part of the production process.
The record keeping of Michael and Mark pays off with bountiful harvests.
You got room?
Yeah, we're gonna go get some more buckets, so.
Yeah, we're full, aren't we? We'll go out with buckets in the field. The flower stems will go directly in the water. And several buckets at a time, they'll come back to the cooler and be stored immediately in the cooler until loading for market the next day.
Dripping Springs Garden sells at their farmers market 3 days a week, so there are 3 big harvesting days every week. But some flowers are harvested on other days.
The problem is that in the summertime, for instance, a gladiola flower will begin to open, and it'll be much too open 1 day later. And you want to catch it somewhat closed and catch it and keep it at a cool temperature to preserve it there until it comes back out into ambient temperature, in which time it'll start to open again at a natural speed. You want that to happen in the customer's house, not at your house. This is a nice stage for harvesting for a farmer's market. And the customer has a lot of vase life left when all the florets open up top. The people at market, they tend to like the florets open so they can see what they're getting. If we were cutting these for wholesale to a florist that was going to store them for a week before they use them in an arrangement, we'd be harvesting them probably at this stage here with just the floret showing color. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Good post-harvest handling is necessary to give flowers the long vase life customers desire. Harvested flowers immediately go into well-scrubbed buckets and clean water. With certain flowers, floral holding solution is added. This controls bacteria growth and provides extra nourishment for the flowers. Leaves on the flower stems, which will be below water level, are stripped off. And finally, flowers are stored in a cooler set at 45 to 50 degrees.
Refrigeration is probably the best investment a flower grower can make in having high quality flowers at market.
Refrigeration allows the harvesting of the flowers at just the right stage and keeps them at that stage until market day. And refrigeration can also help reduce losses on rainy market days when there are leftover flowers due to fewer customers.
For years, we used an old milk cooler that we bought from a local grocery store that was going out of business. I think it cost us $600, and we've just purchased a new walk-in, a 10 by 12, and the expense on that's about $7,000. Cooling flowers down is a very important part of keeping them in the best quality for the market.
The team from Dripping Springs Garden arrives at the farmers market early. Setting up an attractive display is necessary to draw customers. And Mark and Michael have great skill at setting up displays that attract customers like bees to honey. Most bouquets are made on the spot.
We started making bouquets at market as a default because we weren't able to get around to having the time to make bouquets ahead of time. We'd show up at market with all these buckets of flowers and just start making bouquets, and it turned out to be a great draw for the customers. They love watching you make their bouquet, especially for them.
Thank you very much. It's beautiful.
Aren't they just gorgeous?
One thing we found out several years ago is it's important to give the customer a price range. For instance, now we're selling bouquets for $5, $8, $12, and $20. When we started changing our pricing structure so that people had a choice of how much they wanted to spend, our income went up dramatically. It's not like a watermelon or a cabbage or a lettuce. People often want you to go down on the price of your vegetables, but they're happy to pay $5, $8, $12 for a bouquet because it's for the birthday for a special person.
Making attractive bouquets and making them very quickly is a key to success.
You want any other colors in there?
You can pick.
Thanks, Nate.
Thanks, Mark.
Take care.
Mark and Michael's skill at producing high-quality cut flowers and providing customers with just the right bouquet has made them extremely popular with the customers at their farmers market and has made Dripping Springs Garden a flourishing business.